I'm just gonna start it like that. I'm just gonna start it like this. Chikatilo. Andrea Chikatilo. What did you think of this story?
Well, it's one that I'm very familiar with. I covered it on Dark.
Oh, by the way, I'm Mike Boudet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and this is Jack Luna.
And this is the after show to episode 2 of Monstruo. The Rustov Ripper Andrea Chikatilo.
Chikatilo. A lot of people call him Chikatilo, but it's actually Chikatilo. Yeah. And I found that out through listening to the Russian side of the story. I went through a lot of documentaries in Russian, and that's how they pronounce it. But, I mean, I say Andrea, you say Andre throughout it, right?
Yeah.
And those are both apparently right, though. I mean, sometimes it is said Andrea, so I think we can get away with that. Yeah. We're going to make some mistakes.
There's going to be screw-ups here and there. And, your Canadian accent came through a couple times.
Damn
it.
Damn it. I can't help it. I don't know what to do about it. But,
right.
Yeah. I don't say a boot, by the way. I really don't. You said that to me a couple of times. Out may be a problem. I think I say out.
Okay. Maybe the audience can pick out the Canadian in the series. Right in.
Let me know.
Yeah, email Jack Luna at Dark Topic.
Yeah, please. I love that. I love when people send me criticisms through email. But with Chikatilo, man, I thought like how we spoke about Armin with the first episode, how you were going for a sleepy time, like a bedtime story type feel. And I was really trying to continue with that with Chikatilo. I thought we'd be able to do that throughout. But almost immediately, Monstruo took on a life of its own with this one. There was no way I could deliver this story without severity in my voice, without almost like growling the story out. And I could tell you found the same thing, Mike. It was not easy to slow this down. It had to be right in the listener's face or ear, right?
It's a disturbing one. This is one of the most notorious killers of modern history. Just the photographs you find online of this man, there's something so creepy about him, so monstrous. It just comes through in his eyes.
Yes, it does. It does. And nobody picked up on that throughout his life, right? I mean, he was a school teacher. He had plenty of jobs, and he got away with this for a very long time. They just thought he was aloof. He was very intelligent, but that aloofness, he used that to fly underneath the radar for so long. He was very manipulative, very cunning, and very motivated to continue killing for as long as he possibly can. And he got a lot of breaks along the way, no doubt.
And we've seen this a lot in a lot of different stories we've told on Sword and Scale in terms of, especially in the medical field, where nurses and doctors who are no good and are actually murderers keep getting pushed from hospital to hospital so that it's not their problem. And in this sort of Cold War or post-Cold War era Russia, where you'd have sort of that same secrecy and that same sort of hushed tone about what's actually going on under the layer of appropriateness, you have this sort of veil of darkness that's so disturbing that this man did so many things. He how many murders was it? It was like 50 something, right?
More than that, yeah. They think who knows how many, at least 50. And it's interesting what you just said. Like in Russia at the time, I mean, it's kind of one of those places where it's like you mind your own business. And in the school system, when he was accused of molesting his students, they never brought him, they didn't fire him for that. It never made the paper because they didn't want their school to be known for that. So they just shoved him off to the next school and made it somebody else's problem rather than dealing with it. Here in North America these days, I mean, all that stuff gets blown wide open and people want to shame these people publicly and for good reason. But there at this time, no, it was a sweep under the rug type approach, which ended up biting them in the ass, to say the least.
This is a man who molested and killed young children. And one of the most horrible parts of this story for me is the scene in the water.
Yeah.
And the way that he describes sort of what his sexual motivation is. He realizes it's not about sex. It's not about what you and I guess, would consider something that's sexy. It's more about the control and the manipulation and the being able to exert your full will over another human being that has no way to escape you.
Yeah. And he found it was a way to unlock his own virility. I mean, he was impotent in a lot of ways, right? He didn't have Viagra. What he had was a folding knife and a fantasy. And he found when he began to inflict pain on somebody that turned him on. And that became an addiction for him. So much so, I mean, he already fantasized about it, but as soon as he did it, and we explained it in the episode, he couldn't stop. He had to ramp it up and ramp it up and ramp it up, you know? Messed up.
Yeah. I mean, not to this extent, obviously, but there's a lot of people out there that get off on the power and the control over someone else instead of sort of a more traditional, I guess, I don't know how to describe it even. Just what you consider something sexual isn't necessarily about
the sex itself, right? It's about, like you said, the control.
About the physical contact or about the physical wanting. It's more the control and the power and the manipulation of someone.
Yeah, and it always, not always, but a lot of the time it goes back to their childhood. They didn't have power in their childhood, so that is something that they seek out in adulthood. And being that screwed up, it gets all mixed in with their sexuality, and it gets all tangled and screwed up. And with Andre Chikatilo, I went to levels that I never comprehend. I myself couldn't even comprehend being sexually aroused by just having control over somebody myself personally. But him to this degree, it's truly mind-boggling. And to have children involved too, and he had children, to be able to make that disconnect, it's just unbelievable. A true monster.
I love how this story starts off in a cell in the courtroom, which are some of the most iconic images of this man and his crimes.
Yeah.
That when you look up Andrea Chikatilo online, you will see him in that cage in that courtroom and his crazy eyes behind those bars.
Yeah, it's some of the only footage that we really have, and it's all in Russian, right? So it was hard to and we filled in a lot of the blanks there. I mean, there's parts where a woman comes over the banister and swipes at Chikatilo. There's no actual footage of that. I mean, that's an example of us telling the story in the spaces in which we don't know what happened or whatever. I know his glasses were broken at some point. We didn't know how. So Tyler Bell, who wrote most of this episode, and I had a lot to do with it as well, but he really went with the guards screwing with him, right? And probably stepped on his glasses at some point or whatever. So there is a documentary in Russian where you can see him in his cell, and it is like a dungeon. It's terrible. They open up the cell, they open up a door, and then the door's there, and he's peeking out of it with his broken glasses, like, "Hi, hi guys, I'm fucking crazy in here." It's weird, man. What a guy. But what I'd like to say, Mike.
He was.
What's that?
I was going to say he was crazy. I
Yes.
mean, this is the definition of crazy. This man, doesn't he actually expose himself inside this courtroom?
Oh yeah, takes off his pants, starts whacking at his flaccid penis, saying, "What am I to do with this thing? Look at me. You know, look at what you've made me." He's blaming the communist regime. He's blaming everybody else. He's very crazy. Very intelligent as well, which is always a dangerous mix. Seems to go hand in hand far too often. But he admitted to some extent some of the things he did, but he never showed true remorse. It was always somebody else's fault, everybody else's fault, that they created me. You know, you created me. Society created me. That's fucked up.
Right. Never taking responsibility.
No. And I'd like to say, in these stories, you know, the right thing to do is to be delicate when sharing the details of a murder, especially the murder of a child, you know, the rape of a child. But unfortunately, that passive approach to sharing information isn't effective in bringing the listener to the scene.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do here. The only way for us to bring you into Andre Chikatilo's dacha on Mezovoy Lane is to force you unwillingly, in many cases, I'm sure, through that door, along with young Yelena, and lock it behind you, much like what happened to that little girl, you know?
Yeah, you can't dilly-dally. You can't censor and tell the story properly, at least not to the point where you actually convey the horror of what he did.
Right. I mean, I think I've said it before, I think you're doing the victim a disservice if you do that, because you're watering down how intense and how violent and how evil the thing is that happened to them. And if the courts don't understand that, if people don't understand that, the public opinion doesn't get swayed with the actual facts of what went down, then the punishment that's doled out might not be the appropriate one.
Absolutely. And not only that, but I do feel like there is a preventative measure in telling these stories to future horrors.
Right.
I think that there is a preventative measure in shaming the shit out of these people.
Yes.
Showing what garbage human beings they actually are and not watering that down in any way. Because there is sometimes there is this sort of cult-like following to some of these characters that I think that, I've been labeled as someone who props them up, and I don't think I do. I think I just tell the stories as clearly and truthfully and without holding back as possible, because and I've said this before, if something were to happen to me or someone I love, someone in my family that I love, I wouldn't want media outlets to be watering down the actual truths of what happened. I'd want them to shame that motherfucker as much as possible.
Me too. I'd be screaming at anyone who would listen all the details of the case that I know to be factual. I'd be letting people know this is what he did, and that doesn't happen often enough. And I hope that people don't get skewed here. I'm sure we did a good enough job, and people are intelligent enough to realize sometimes in my narration, I behave as the killer. I try to get into their head and I try to speak as the killer. And I'm not enjoying that, but I'm doing that to put it across just how bad this is, how much he's enjoying it. It's difficult to do. I had trouble with it initially until, Mike, you said to me on the phone one day, you said, hey, you didn't do it. Like, he did it. You didn't do it. And from there, I almost became angry. I wanted to shame Chikatilo by expressing just how vile, evil, and disgusting he was. Once I felt there was a purpose to retelling this shit, then there were no limits for me. And, I didn't do it. You didn't do it. Tyler, Johnny, what we had to do, once I realized I was willing to dive right into it, we had to remove ourselves personally and look at this objectively. Take a deep breath, paint the picture, no matter how messy the material is that we have to work with to paint said picture. We had to just go all out, or else we'd be doing ourselves and the story and the victims a disservice, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Now, I can't speak for Tyler. I've heard he's done some shit, but yeah, you're right. Nobody else on staff has killed or done anything like this to anyone, and we're just trying to tell you the story as respectfully as possible without whitewashing it, basically.
Sure.
So
sure. I don't want to act like we're heroes here. Yeah, we're not heroes. I mean, we're not. No. We're obviously storytellers too, right? So I mean,
and you're listening to this, so you're seeking out entertainment. So come on, we're all complicit. Let's do that.
Yeah, you're all fucked up. Everybody's.
You got anything else you want to hit before we close up?
No, I'm just so happy to be done with Andrea Chikatilo. I'm so glad. I mean, there's worse stuff coming down the pipe, but I'm so happy to be done with him. He is the stuff of nightmares. Like you said, those eyes, man, those eyes have been in my mind for a long period of time now. And I can't wait to start walking away from this guy. Absolutely.
So we'll see you back here next week for the next installment, the next story, which is, it's someone you've probably never heard of because there wasn't a lot of coverage about this case, especially not in the U.S., but it's one that stuck with me very early on, and it's one that I definitely wanted to include in this first season of Monstruo because the details are just horrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it ended up being one of my personal favorites. The one that I thought that wouldn't be so hot, and it ended up being probably one of my favorites in the entire season here. So, we'll see you soon.
Alrighty, see you next week. Monstruo is an Incongruity Media production. The original soundtrack to Monstruo is available on iTunes, Apple Music, Amazon, Google Play, Spotify, and just about everywhere else you listen to music. Merch, such as t-shirts, tank tops, and caps, can be ordered at monstruopodcast.com. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave us a positive review.